All right, so we're diving into Moderna stock today. You've sent us a ton of research articles, reports, even stuff from Moderna's own website, so that's awesome. It shows you're really trying to get a good grasp on this company. But honestly, who has time to read all that?
I know, right? It can be super overwhelming. That's why we're here, though, to help you sort through all the noise and figure out if Moderna is a smart investment.
Exactly. By the end of this deep dive, we'll have a much better sense of what's going on with Moderna and what it all means for your portfolio. So to kick things off, let's zoom out for a second and get back to basics. What does Moderna actually do?
So at its heart, Moderna is a biotech company, and they're really focused on this thing called mRNA medicines.
mRNA medicines. I feel like we all heard that term a lot during the pandemic.
Yeah, you're right. It was kind of unavoidable. It's the tech behind those COVID-19 vaccines that were crazy effective.
Right. Moderna was like the name on everyone's lips back then. So what are they doing now that the pandemic hype has kind of died down?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? They're trying to take that mRNA technology and use it to treat all sorts of other diseases, everything from the flu to cancer.
Wow. That's a huge swing. You think it's a sign of growth, or are they kind of grasping at straws here?
I mean, you can't deny their success with that COVID-19 vaccine Spikevax. It was their very first product that actually hit the market, and it made them a ton of money, more than most companies ever see. But the pandemic was a unique situation. There was this massive demand for a vaccine right away. It'll be tough to replicate that success in other areas.
For sure. So speaking of challenges, let's talk about the people at the top.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal with Moderna's management team? Are they the right people to lead the company into this new phase?
One thing that jumps out from all the stuff you sent over is just how fast they reacted during the pandemic. They got that vaccine developed and approved incredibly quickly.
That's true. It shows they can move quickly when they need to.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of decisiveness and agility is super impressive, especially during a crisis. But some analysts are a little worried about Moderna's relationship with the FDA.
Like they're too cozy.
Yeah, something like that. Obviously, companies need to work with regulators, but it's a fine line. You got to make sure things are above board and there's no funny business going on.
Right. No one wants to see favoritism or anything like that.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that make people raise an eyebrow, you mentioned earlier that they're spending a ton on research and development. What exactly are they investing in?
So, yeah, they're doing a ton of research in-house, but they're also just buying up other companies, straight up. It's like they're trying to buy their way into new technologies and areas of expertise.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's a risky strategy, right?
For sure. It could pay off big time, but it could also lead to overspending and a lack of focus. If they're not careful, they could end up spread too thin.
It's a classic high-risk, high-reward scenario. So to really understand if Moderna is spending wisely, we need to look at their financial health. How are they actually doing right now?
Things are a little shaky, I'll be honest. They made a killing during the pandemic, but now that vaccine sales are dropping, their revenue is taking a hit.
Ouch. So their golden goose is starting to lay fewer eggs.
Basically. But it's not all doom and gloom. They're still sitting on a mountain of cash from those pandemic profits, and they're trying to cut costs and become more efficient.
Like tightening their belts after a big shopping spree.
Exactly. And they're also planning to increase the price of that COVID vaccine.
Really? Do you think people will pay more for it now?
It's a gamble for sure. And that uncertainty is reflected in their revenue projections for 2025. Some analysts think they'll bring in around $1.5 billion. Others say it could be as high as $2.5 billion. That's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how confident they are in their own future.
It definitely raises some questions. And that uncertainty plays right into what we call market sentiment. But we'll dive into that after a quick break. So market sentiment, it's basically like checking the vibe on Wall Street. How are investors feeling about Moderna?
Okay, so are they feeling bullish or bearish?
It's a mixed bag, honestly. You send over some really interesting articles from analysts, and it seems like they're pretty divided. Some are super optimistic, others think Moderna is headed for a crash.
What's causing this split? Are they looking at the same information?
They are, but they're interpreting it differently. The bears are definitely focused on those financial challenges we talked about, the declining vaccine sales, the unpredictable earnings, the whole question mark around their revenue in 2025. It's making investors nervous.
Yeah, uncertainty can be a real killer in the market.
Absolutely. But on the flip side, you've got the bulls, and they're all about Moderna's long-term potential. They see that mRNA technology as a game changer, not just for COVID, but for all kinds of diseases.
So they're betting on the future. not the present.
Right. They're pointing to Moderna's pipeline, all those new vaccines and treatments they're working on, plus that huge pile of cash they've got gives them a lot of room to maneuver. They can keep innovating and buying up promising companies.
It's like they're playing with house money.
In a way, yeah. But how do we actually measure market sentiment? Are there any concrete indicators we can look at?
I mean, besides just reading what analysts are saying.
For sure. One thing we can look at is short interest. It basically tells us how many investors are betting against Moderna.
So they're hoping the stock price goes down.
Exactly. A high short interest can be a sign that people are losing faith in the company.
Interesting. So is the short interest high for Moderna?
It's higher than average, which definitely suggests some skepticism. But at the same time, there's a lot of action in the options market. People are buying and selling contracts that bet on Moderna's future stock price.
So it's like they're hedging their bets.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. It means that a lot of investors think Moderna could make a big move either up or down. It's a volatile stock.
So the market's basically saying, we don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be interesting.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And while market sentiment is important, we also need to look at the underlying ownership structure of the company. Who actually owns most of Moderna's stock?
Right, because that can tell us a lot about how confident people are in the company. So who are the big players here?
It's mostly institutional investors like big pension funds and mutual funds. They hold over 77% of Moderna's shares.
Wow. That's a huge chunk.
It is, and these are sophisticated investors. They have teams of analysts who do their due diligence before making any big moves. So their involvement in Moderna could be seen as a good sign.
Like a vote of confidence.
Exactly. But there's a flip side to that, too. If those big investors decide to sell all at once, it could send the stock price plummeting.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It is. That's why it's also worth looking at insider ownership. How much stock do Moderna's own executives and board members own?
Yeah. It's like, are they putting their money where their mouth is?
Exactly. And in Moderna's case, the insider ownership is pretty low. It's only around 9%.
It does make you wonder why they're not buying more if they really believe in the company's future.
It definitely raises some questions, but to really understand if Moderna is a good investment, we need to step back and look at the bigger picture. And for that, I think a SWOT analysis is the perfect tool.
A SWOT analysis. That's where we break down the company's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic framework for analyzing a company's position in the market and figuring out their potential for success. So let's start with the good stuff. What are Moderna's key strengths?
Lay it on me.
Well, their mRNA technology platform is clearly a major asset. It's cutting edge, it's incredibly adaptable, and it allows them to develop new treatments really quickly. Plus, that success with the COVID vaccine gave them a proven track record and a ton of brand recognition. Most biotech companies would kill for that.
Sounds like they're in a pretty good position, but they can't be perfect, right?
Right.
What about their weaknesses?
Of course, they have weaknesses. The biggest one is their reliance on that single product, the COVID vaccine. As we talked about earlier, the drop in vaccine sales has really hurt their revenue. They need to diversify if they want to survive long term.
So all their eggs are in one basket.
Basically. And that's not ideal. Another weakness is their volatile earnings. The market hates unpredictability, and Moderna's financial performance has been all over the place.
That makes it hard for investors to figure out what they're really worth.
Exactly. And then there's that whole thing with their relationship with the FDA. Any whiff of impropriety could really damage their reputation.
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, so some definite areas for improvement. But let's talk about opportunities. What are some exciting avenues for growth that Moderna could explore?
Honestly, the possibilities with their mRNA technology seem endless. They're already working on treatments for all sorts of diseases, everything from the flu and RSV to cancer and heart disease.
It's like they have a magic bullet.
It's a powerful technology. And beyond treating existing diseases, they could potentially develop personalized medicine, tailoring treatments to a person's unique genetic makeup. That's a huge market with tons of potential.
So they're on the cutting edge of medicine. It's pretty exciting. But even with all this potential, I'm sure there are some threats on the horizon. What are they facing?
Well, the biotech industry is insanely competitive. There are tons of companies fighting for market share research funding and top talent. Moderna has to stay ahead of the curve if they want to succeed.
It's like a constant arms race.
Exactly. And then there's the regulatory environment. The FDA approval process is a long and winding road, and it's not always predictable. Delays or rejections can really throw a wrench in a company's plans.
And we can't forget about the legal side of things.
Right. Patent disputes and lawsuits are a constant threat. Intellectual property is fiercely protected in this industry, and any legal battles can be costly and time-consuming.
It's a reminder that even with amazing technology, the business world can be brutal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And finally, we have to consider the uncertainty of market demand. Even if Moderna develops a miracle cure, there's no guarantee that people will want it or that insurance companies will cover it.
So it's a lot of ifs and maybes.
It is, which is why investing in Moderna is inherently risky, but it also has the potential for huge rewards.
So it's a gamble.
It is, but it's a calculated gamble. They have a lot of things going for them, but there are also some serious risks to consider.
So for our listeners who are trying to decide if Moderna stock is a buy, what's the bottom line?
Honestly, it comes down to your personal risk tolerance and how confident you are in Moderna's ability to execute on their plans. They have the technology, the resources, and the ambition, but they also face some serious challenges.
It's like a coin toss.
Mhm.
Heads, they become the next big thing. Tails, they fade into obscurity.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure which way it will go, but one thing's for certain, it's going to be an interesting ride.
And speaking of interesting,
Mhm.
did you catch that little tidbit in one of the reports? They're aiming for 10 product approvals by 2027.
Yeah, that's a bold goal. If they can pull it off, it would be a game changer.
But 10 approvals in just a few years? That seems almost impossible.
It is. And it highlights the gamble inherent in investing in a company like Moderna. You're essentially betting on their ability to overcome all those challenges we talked about and deliver on their promises.
So for our listeners, the big question is, do you believe in Moderna?
Exactly. Do you have faith in their technology, their leadership, and their ability to navigate the complex world of biotech? If so, then Moderna might be worth the risk.
And of course, this isn't financial advice. We're just two people having a conversation about a fascinating company with a lot of potential and some big questions hanging over its head.
Exactly. Always do your own research and talk to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive on Moderna, be sure to subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel. We're using cutting-edge research and AI to break down complex financial topics and help you make smarter investment choices.
We'll see you there. And until then, remember, knowledge is power.